Hello, Namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. The top headline today comes from a Signal group. Signal as in the messaging app. Top US officials discussed their war plans there on Signal. And they added a journalist to the group, apparently by mistake. We'll tell you what happened next and how Donald Trump is responding to this. Meanwhile, in Saudi Arabia, there have been marathon peace talks stretching over 12 hours, but no peace yet for Ukraine and Russia. In India, the government is trying to evade or at least soften the blow of Trump tariffs. A US delegation is in New Delhi for talks. We'll tell you how it's playing out. Also, how Indian markets and the rupee have gained over the past week. Have they bounced back? We'll discuss that. Why India may suffer because of Trump's Venezuela policy. How the growing protests in Turkey may prove to be the biggest challenge for Erdogan yet. Why Canada is accusing India again, this time saying that New Delhi has the intent to interfere in next month's election. What is China's newest weapon? An undersea cable cutter. Why India's first naval drills with Africa are so significant? And is there a hidden old city under the Egyptian pyramids? All this and more coming up. The headlines first. India exposes Pakistan at the United Nations once again, calls out Islamabad for unwarranted remarks on Jammu and Kashmir. India asks Pakistan to vacate the illegally occupied parts of the region. Just last week, New Delhi had slammed Islamabad at a UN meeting and rejected its baseless claims of human rights violations in Jammu and Kashmir. The Sudanese army strikes a market in the western Darfur region. The airstrike has reportedly killed hundreds of people. Since 2023, the army has been fighting the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces. The RSF controls nearly all of Darfur, which has faced some of the worst violence in this war. Australia unveils tax cuts in its pre-election budget. It will also slash student debt and speed up defence spending. Later this week, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese is expected to call a general election. Polls show his Labour government is locked in a tight race with the Conservatives. South Korea scrambles to contain its worsening wildfires. At least 4 people have been killed and thousands of acres of land have been destroyed. The blaze has also burned a historic Buddhist temple to the ground. This is one of South Korea's worst ever fire outbreaks. And chewing gum releases hundreds of microplastics into the mouth, say researchers. The study also warns of pollution created by the rubber-based sweet. If you chew around 200 pieces of gum a year, you could be ingesting 30,000 microplastics. Have you wondered what world leaders say to each other? Not in front of the camera, but in private. What do they say to each other in their private messages and social media chats? Well, now we know, thanks to a major blunder at the White House. US officials mistakenly added a journalist to a top-secret group. And in this group, they posted their war plans. That's right. The group was called Houthi PC Small Group. PC stands for Principal Committee. It's a group of America's senior-most security officials. This chat was created on a messaging platform called Signal. Think of it as WhatsApp, but safer. The group included some of Donald Trump's top officials like Vice President J.D. Vance, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, and National Security Advisor Mike Waltz. It was Waltz who added this journalist to the group. His name is Jeffrey Goldberg. the journalist. He's the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic. He was added to the group on March 11th. And what happened next will blow your mind. These American officials were discussing US policy against the Houthis, whether to attack them, how to attack them, and when to attack them. Apparently, Trump had given them a clear order. He wanted to go after the Houthis, to clear the Red Sea shipping lanes by force, but Vice President J.D. Vance was not convinced. In this group, he deviated from Trump's message. Let me quote from what he posted. "I'm not sure the president is aware how inconsistent this is with his message on Europe right now. There's a further risk that we see a moderate to severe spike in oil prices." So J.D. Vance was not in favor of this attack. He felt like it was like America bailing out the Europeans. Why the Europeans? Because they use the Red Sea a lot. It is the shortest route from Asia to Europe. So Vance wanted to delay the strike, but Pentagon chief, the American defense minister essentially, Pete Hegseth, disagreed. He wrote that waiting around meant a lot of risks. For starters, what if the plan got leaked? Which is a brave thing to say after mistakenly putting a journalist on your top secret group. Anyway, Hegseth was all in. He said only the Americans could pull off such an operation, and looks like he convinced the VP. Listen to this exchange.
At Pete Hegseth, if you think we should do it, let's go. I just hate bailing out Europe again.
VP, I fully share your loathing of European freeloading. It's pathetic. But Mike, US NSA, is correct. We are the only ones on the planet who can do this. Nobody else even close.
The final word came from Trump's close advisor. His name is Stephen Miller. He said Trump had given the green light, but he wanted Europe to pay up for this operation, meaning the US will restore Red Sea shipping. In return, they would get some economic benefits or payments. Now we cut to March 15. Pete Hegseth posted America's war plans on the group, like which targets would be hit, what weapons would be used, and the sequence of the attacks. Let me repeat that. America's defense secretary posted war plans on a messaging app. J.D. Vance replied to it, saying that he would pray for victory. And a few others chimed in with a prayer emoji. Yes, the same one that all of us use. Hegseth announced that the first bombs would drop at 1:45 p.m. Eastern Time, and on cue the strikes began. Soon the congratulations poured in. Look at the message by National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, a fist bump emoji, an American flag emoji, and a fire emoji. It's like a teen reacting to his favorite TV show. After seeing all this, the journalist exited the group, the Signal group, and he wrote to these top US officials. He asked them whether it was a real group or not. And yesterday, the White House confirmed that it was. You can imagine the horror and shame. The Americans are supposed to be intelligence experts. They topple regimes for fun, yet they couldn't keep their chats to themselves. Naturally, the White House is on the defensive. Donald Trump says he has no idea about the incident.
I don't know anything about it. I'm not a big fan of The Atlantic. To me, it's a magazine that's going out of business. I think it's not much of a magazine, but I know nothing about it. You're saying that they had what?
They were using Signal to coordinate on sensitive materials and
Having to do with what? Having to do with what? What were they talking about?
with the Houthis.
The Houthis? You mean the attack on the Houthis?
Correct.
Well, it couldn't have been very effective because the attack was very effective, I can tell you that.
Pentagon Chief Pete Hegseth is also being dismissive. He says no war plans were discussed.
You're talking about a deceitful and highly discredited so-called journalist who's made a profession of peddling hoaxes time and time again, to include the hoaxes of Russia, or the fine people on both sides hoax, or suckers and losers hoax. So this is the guy that peddles in garbage. This is what he does.
A couple of things stand out in this fiasco. Number one, Trump officials are taking things too lightly. Signal is used to plan meetings and discussions, but not to reveal top secrets. It shows a level of carelessness in the White House. Number two, turns out top secret chats are much like our chats. Emojis, rants, and the occasional all caps. Even the group name is not official. It was simply called Houthis PC Small Group. And finally, point number 3, the hatred for Europe is real. It's not some made-up campaign strategy. Trump officials are genuinely fed up with Europe. They accused Europe of freeloading and they called Europe pathetic. It's not clear where this controversy will head next. The Democrats are calling for an investigation, but the White House wants to move on quickly. I guess the lesson here is clear. If you're a journalist, get on Signal and watch out for invites. The next one could come from the White House. Meanwhile, Donald Trump is chasing a trade deal with India. We are days away from the 2nd of April when Trump's reciprocal tariffs are set to kick in, and Washington is targeting all major trade partners.
Doing it to help our country, and our country was riddled with fat, like no country probably anywhere in the world, and we're getting rid of the fat. And at the same time, we're going to be bringing in millions of very good, high-paying jobs, and we're going to be taking in a lot of money. Our country's going to be very strong. We've been ripped off by every country in the world, friend and foe.
India, too, is on Trump's list. The US president has called India a tariff king. Those were his words, a tariff king. He has repeatedly slammed India's high tariffs and threatened to tax Indian exports to the US. The message has been clear and consistent. Whatever they tax us, we will tax them. Listen to this.
So when India, which is a very big abuser, and Modi, he's fantastic, fantastic man. A lot of these leaders are fantastic. You have to understand one thing. They're 100%. These people are the sharpest people. They're not a little bit backward. They are at the top. You know the expression, they're at the top of their game, and they use it against us. But India is very tough.
The clock is ticking. Indian government officials are hard at work trying to avoid the worst of Trump's actions. And with that goal in mind, India kicked off critical trade talks with the United States. A delegation of American trade officials is in New Delhi as we speak. Among them is Brendan Lynch. He is a top US trade negotiator. He's on a 5-day visit to India. Lynch has been holding talks with Piyush Goyal, who is the Commerce Minister of India. They are discussing a trade deal. India and the US have set a deadline for autumn. They want to close the first round of negotiations by then. But with Trump's tariff deadline looming, this week's talks gain a sense of urgency. They could shape India's trade relationship with the United States. So making progress now is very important. Which brings us to the question, what is the status right now? How close are the US and India to a trade deal? Well, they have made some headway, but key differences still remain. The US wants a significant trade deal with India, a deal that covers a wide range of products from electronics and farm goods to automobiles, all of it. In fact, Trump has specifically complained about this, about India's tariffs on auto exports.
On average, the European Union, China, Brazil, India, Mexico, and Canada, have you heard of them? And countless other nations charge us tremendously higher tariffs than we charge them. It's very unfair. India charges us auto tariffs higher than 100%.
So Trump would like to see a wider deal, one that covers all major areas of the US economy, but India wants to take a more selective approach. India wants to pick and choose which goods to allow under this trade pact. And this approach seems to have frustrated the Americans. Howard Lutnick has questioned India's position on farm goods. He is the US Commerce Secretary, or America's version of a commerce minister. He wants lower tariffs on American produce. This weekend, he gave an interview in which he discussed the trade talks with India. Let me quote from what the US Commerce Secretary had to say. I said to Prime Minister Modi, you have 1.4 billion people and you brag to us how amazing your economy is. Why won't you buy a bushel of our corn? So US farmers can't go to India, but Indian farmers can come at us. Why is that okay? Apparently, Lutnick had this exchange in February when Prime Minister Modi met President Trump. They held talks at the White House. Remember, farm imports are a sensitive matter for India. Agriculture is the backbone of our economy, of the Indian economy. It contributes 16% to India's GDP, and 46% of India's population depends on this sector for their livelihoods. So opening up India to US farm products could be counterproductive. Having said that, India has tried to meet the US halfway. It has lowered trade barriers to some American products, stuff like apples, American nuts, and duck meat. But Washington is not satisfied. It is asking for more. It wants better market access for a range of goods like corn, soybean, cotton, pulses, and dairy. So India is trying to find the middle ground. Reports say New Delhi is open to making major concessions. It could cut tariffs on $23 billion worth of US imports. That's more than half of US imports to India. The total is worth around $41 billion today. So what India is offering should be a tempting proposition. Of course, there are risks involved and no easy choices for New Delhi. Lower tariffs could hurt domestic industries. Higher tariffs will hurt Indian exporters. You have to pick one. After all, the US is one of India's top export destinations. Last year, India exported goods worth $77 billion to the US. If President Trump slaps tariffs on them, if he chooses to punish Indian exports, it would cost the Indian economy dearly. The losses could be as high as $7 billion a year. Beyond that, the tariffs have broader implications. They signal a shift in the global order, and they may spell the end of globalization. That is the assessment of Mark Tucker. He's the chairman of HSBC. He recently spoke on the state of global trade. Tucker says trade tensions are rising, and this creates economic uncertainty. He fears that the global trade system could be junked. Regional blocs may replace globalization and free markets. That is his assessment. And Trump's policies are tailor-made to accelerate this shift. So how should India view this? This is not just about trade. India faces a strategic choice here. It can make concessions to protect exports or face higher trade barriers in the US. But can it strike a compromise before the 2nd of April? Yes, we'll find out soon enough. Indian stock markets are watching these trade talks. After weeks of weakness, investors are feeling upbeat, it seems. There has been a rally in Indian stocks. They have made a comeback of sorts. Indian markets recorded their 7th straight day of gains today. The Sensex rose by 32 points. It is India's top 30 companies make up the Sensex. And the Nifty added another 10 points. This index, the Nifty 50, represents India's top 50 companies. So both indices are up. Today's gains were modest, but since last week, Indian markets have shown momentum. Investor wealth has surged. Till yesterday, they added over 27 lakh crores to their wealth. That's over $300 billion. And this is quite a turnaround because 2025 started poorly for Indian stocks. India was one of Asia's worst performing markets. So what do we make of this last week? Are Indian markets turning a corner? Is this the beginning of a bull run? Well, we cannot say for sure, but there are some positive signs. The economy is recovering. In February, India's GDP numbers improved. From October to December, India's growth rate stood at 6.2%. And this is better than the previous quarter. From July to September, India grew at 5.6%. So there is clear improvement. Now it's 6.2%. Inflation, too, has been tamed. In February, India's inflation dipped to 3.61%. Now, the central bank's target for inflation is 4%. Anything below 4% is considered good. At 3.61%, What we have in terms of inflation is an achievement. The central bank, of course, is the Reserve Bank of India. It is expected to cut interest rates now, and this would make borrowing cheaper, which in turn should boost investments. Foreign investors are also making a comeback. Last week, they bought over $500 million in Indian shares. The government is doing its bit to spur the economy. Last year, spending on infrastructure was sluggish. It slowed to around $2 billion a month. In December and January, the spending picked up. It rose to over $10 billion a month, and this has lifted multiple areas of India's economy. It has created more jobs. It has boosted sectors like construction and manufacturing and improved India Inc.'s outlook. Investors now expect a lot of companies to report better earnings. Retail investors have also played a role in this rally. Last week, more than 600,000 new investors entered the markets. All of these factors helped the markets recover. The rupee too has gained against the US dollar. It appreciated for 7 straight sessions before halting its winning streak today. So there is fresh energy in the markets in India, but not everything is on solid ground. We must say this. Experts are advising investors to be cautious. They fear that this rally could lose steam. If India Inc.'s earnings do not live up to expectations, things may go downhill. Plus, there are external risks, like the impending Trump tariffs on the 2nd of April. If he slaps tariffs on Indian goods, Indian companies will be hit. Their bottom line and stock price will be under pressure. The Indian economy also faces challenges. Consider this scenario. What if Trump decides to raise import taxes and the new rates apply on all Indian goods and services? What would happen then? If Trump raises taxes by just 10% on Indian goods and services, 10% hike, it could knock off 0.5% or more from India's overall growth. So there are reasons to be cautious. The rebound in the markets may bring short-term relief, but it remains to be seen if this rally is sustainable. It is hard to make a prediction on the basis of current trends. We live in unpredictable times, and the stock markets are simply reflecting the new reality. It was the diplomatic equivalent of an awkward family reunion. The Ukrainians, the Russians, the Americans all holed up in the same hotel in Riyadh, talking about peace, but not to each other. Yesterday, Russia and the US sat down for talks. It was a marathon 12-hour meeting. And what came out of it? Well, not very much. Moscow and Washington were supposed to issue a joint statement. That did not happen. A readout was also expected, and that too is missing. So the end result is more questions than answers. The Kremlin was asked about this, and here's what they said.
I'm sure you will ask me about the results of talks in Riyadh. The results of the finished long Russian-American talks have been reported to the capitals. They are being analyzed now. So far, there are no plans of talks at the highest level. But as you know, it can rise rather fast. There is an understanding that the communication will continue, but there is nothing specific yet. It will be agreed upon.
That doesn't tell us anything. Their answer was as vague as the outcome of the talks. But we have some inputs on what was discussed, and this came from the Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov. He says the Black Sea was on the agenda. Monday's talks focused on a maritime ceasefire so that both sides can resume trade. Lavrov wants the US to quote-unquote order Kiev to sign the new navigation deal.
When the president said, "We are for a ceasefire, but there are nuances who will ensure that the Nazi regime in Kiev doesn't break the promise. We are also in favor of considering ways not to cause any damage to the energy infrastructure. This is not in our interests." And, as the president said, we are in favor of resuming the Black Sea Initiative in some form that is more acceptable to everyone. The Black Sea Initiative was discussed in Riyadh as a priority. Our position is simple. I have just stated it roughly. We cannot trust Zelensky's word for it.
Also on the table is the 2022 Black Sea grain deal. A quick primer first. The Black Sea is located to the south of Ukraine. It is the only way to ship anything out of the country. But when the war began, the Russians blocked the Black Sea. They said all vessels were fair game. Even commercial ones carrying food grains, the Russians would attack them. That's when the United Nations and Turkey got together. They brokered a deal between Russia and Ukraine. And what did that deal say? That Ukraine could ship food grains from 3 ports. In return, Russia too got some concessions. They were allowed to sell food and fertilizers. In July 2023, this deal was up for renewal, but Putin refused to do it. He said the West was not keeping its word and that Russian food exports were facing a lot of restrictions, so Moscow refused to renew the deal. Which brings us to today. Moscow wants to revive that deal, and it is pushing hard for it. What about Ukraine? What is their position? Well, they weren't a part of these talks, but the US delegation met them separately this morning. It was a brief discussion, sort of like a debrief. The statement from that meeting has just come, and there are 2 big takeaways. Number one, both Russia and Ukraine agree to stop military strikes in the Black Sea. That is point number 1. And number 2, the US will support Russian agriculture exports. These are 2 points that Kiev has agreed to. Ukraine has also established some red lines. Any Russian warship beyond the eastern part of the Black Sea would be seen as a violation. So for now, trade will resume in the region. There will be less militarization. The Black Sea could witness some peace. But what about Ukraine?
We need a movement towards real peace, towards guaranteed security. This is necessary for everyone, in Ukraine, in Europe, in America, and for all those in the world who seek stability in international relations.
What we're seeing right now are baby steps. A Black Sea ceasefire is the first step. What comes next? Where does that leave the prospects of peace? Right now, the path looks murky. Despite all the developments, the path still looks uncertain. Russia says it is open to talks, but only on its terms. Ukraine says it won't negotiate without security guarantees, and the US is busy shuttling between the 2 rooms. Meanwhile, Europe has a serious case of FOMO. It doesn't want to be left out. So the UK and France are now planning their own talks, a meeting of their so-called coalition of the willing. This is a group of countries ready to step up military aid for Ukraine. This meeting will take place on Thursday. But will it change anything? Diplomacy may be in full swing in Riyadh and Paris, but on the ground, the war is only escalating. Overnight, Moscow launched 139 drones. 78 of them were shot down. In the Ukrainian city of Sumy, a Russian strike injured 101 people, including 23 children. Meanwhile, Ukraine struck Russia's Belgorod, destroying 4 military helicopters. So right now, both armies are digging in, neither side willing to compromise, and the war grinds on. US President Donald Trump has announced a new set of tariffs, an additional 25% on any country that imports oil from Venezuela. This is over and above everything that comes on the 2nd of April. It's a move to punish Venezuela by cutting off the country's key economic lifeline. But the tariffs don't target Caracas directly. They target buyers of Venezuelan oil. So countries like China and India are in Trump's crosshairs. Our next report has the details.
You've probably heard the saying, killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Well, Donald Trump plans to do just that. He has his metaphorical stone ready. It's a brand new 25% tariff, and his 2 birds are Venezuela and China. Trump signed this executive order yesterday. The name says it all, imposing tariffs on countries importing Venezuelan oil. Trump says the order is a way to punish Venezuela. for purposefully and deceitfully sending tens of thousands of criminals to the US. He claimed that Venezuela keeps sending murderers and people of a very violent nature, especially members of the gang called Tren de Aragua. Trump has declared this gang a foreign terrorist organization, and he has been deporting anyone even suspected of being part of the gang. Trump says that his new executive order is a way to punish Venezuela, but indirectly. Instead of targeting Caracas, he's targeting countries that buy Venezuelan oil. His prime target is China. It's mentioned specifically in his executive order. China is the largest buyer of Venezuelan crude oil. It imported over 500,000 barrels of Venezuelan crude per day last month. That's about 55% of all the oil Venezuela exported. China responded to the situation earlier today.
The United States has long abused illegal unilateral sanctions. China firmly opposes this and urges the U.S. to stop interfering in Venezuela's internal affairs. There are no winners in trade wars or tariff wars. Raising tariffs will only impose greater losses on American businesses and consumers.
Trump has already imposed a blanket 20% tariff on all Chinese imports to the US. There's an additional 25% on Chinese steel and aluminium. So if Beijing doesn't stop importing Venezuelan oil, the tariffs could go up to 45% on all goods and a whopping 70% on Chinese steel and aluminium. The Chinese statement may have been confrontational, but Beijing may actually toe Trump's line, because the alternative could devastate its trade. It would be easier for Beijing to just dump Venezuelan oil, and Caracas knows this. But Venezuela's president, Nicolas Maduro, struck a defiant note.
We defeated yesterday's sanctions, and we will also defeat those to come. They can sanction and impose tariffs on whoever they want. What they will not be able to sanction is the love and patriotism of the Venezuelan people.
China is the top buyer of Venezuelan oil, but second is the US. And conveniently for Trump, he can't really tariff himself. The American oil giant Chevron operates in Venezuela. It was supposed to wrap up its operations, but Trump just granted them an extension till the 27th of May. All other countries have to stop importing Venezuelan oil before the 2nd of April. So there's a chance that Chevron and the US could make a killing because of Trump's new executive order. But it doesn't end there, because other countries also import oil from Venezuela. Countries like India. India's oil imports from Venezuela hit 22 million barrels in 2024, after years of no trade because of US sanctions. Now, once again, India will become collateral damage in America's power games.
He dreamt of ruling the Muslim world, but he can barely control Istanbul. That's the story of Recep Tayyip Erdogan. He's been leading Turkey for more than 20 years now, first as Prime Minister, then as President. In this time, he has dismantled most good things in the country, whether it's the fair democratic process or the independent judiciary or the famous Turkish secularism. But now the people have had enough. They have risen up in rebellion. Today marks the 7th night of public protests in Turkey. Take a look.
Mücadeleye devam.
The trigger was a detention last week. Turkish officials took Istanbul's mayor into custody last Wednesday. His name is Ekrem İmamoğlu. He's now in jail over corruption charges. İmamoğlu is not just any other Turkish politician. He is Erdogan's chief rival. He was supposed to be nominated as a presidential challenger last week. Basically, he was to take on Erdogan in 2028. The election is still far away. And days before that, before his nomination, he was detained. Coincidence? Certainly not. Erdogan might as well have slapped the handcuffs on İmamoğlu. That is how complicit he was. The protest may have started against this arrest, But now it's about a lot more. It's about the lack of jobs in the country. It's about the rising inflation. It's about the shrinking civil liberties. And it is about imposing conservative Islamic rules. You can basically take your pick. Because President Erdogan has messed up virtually everything in Turkey. Yet he remains defiant. He is blaming the opposition party for spreading violence, and he has called them primitive and weak.
Son 5 gündür. What we have witnessed in the last 5 days has shown us the truth again. A country like Turkey has a main opposition party that is too small, too primitive, and too weak in terms of foresight, vision, and quality. It has become apparent once again that they could not be trusted to run a country, let alone local governments, or even a buffet.
Erdogan's cops are using pepper spray on peaceful protesters, but sure, the opposition is primitive. So far, around 1,200 people have been detained, and this includes journalists as well. But how did Turkey reach this situation? This country was once seen as a model for West Asia, a secular, progressive democracy. What happened to those values? In one word, Erdogan. That's what happened. Initially, his policies did deliver growth, but in the last decade, it's been a train wreck. Just look at their currency, the lira. In March 2015, $1 was equal to 2.6 lira. Do you know how much it is today? From 2.6 to almost 38 lira. $1 is 38 lira. That is Erdogan's legacy in the last decade. Though one number has risen under his rule, and that is inflation. Last month, Turkey's inflation was at 42%. His own policies contributed to this. Until recently, Erdogan pushed for Islamic economic policies, and a big part of that was low interest rates. You see, Islam frowns upon charging interest. So President Erdogan said, "We will not hike lending rates." Even when inflation crossed 50%, Erdogan said no. He let his own people suffer for his beliefs. Meanwhile, he was more focused abroad. Erdogan was busy spreading the Arab Spring around West Asia. He was busy talking about Kashmir. Every UN meeting, Erdogan would do the same. His usual spin plus Kashmir. Nobody asked for his advice or suggestions, but Erdogan gave it anyway. He talked about the so-called oppression in Kashmir. You want to know who's really oppressed? These Turkish protesters on your screens, they are being bludgeoned with water cannons, beaten back with batons and doused with pepper spray. This is what oppression looks like. Erdogan forgot the most simple rule of politics. Fix your country first, then lecture abroad. If not, this will be the result. Also at blame are the morality professors in Washington and Brussels. Where have they disappeared? The European Union released a weak statement. They asked Turkey, and I'm quoting, to uphold democratic values. I'm sure Erdogan is trembling with fear. And the Americans? Well, they're simply following the events in Turkey. The State Department called it an internal judicial matter. Why the soft approach? Because the West needs Erdogan. He is key to doing business with the new regime in Syria. He's a key channel between Ukraine and Russia. He's also a member of NATO, hence the blind eye to this crackdown in Turkey. Donald Trump's ally, Elon Musk, is actively supporting Erdogan. He has suspended X accounts of Turkish opposition leaders. I guess free speech dies in the Bosphorus. All of this makes one thing quite clear. The battle lines have been drawn in Turkey. Erdogan has survived worse than this. But remember, he's a lot older now and a lot more unpopular than he was. Plus, he is facing a younger, charismatic challenger. In his pursuit of rebuilding the grand Ottoman legacy, Erdogan may have jeopardized his own or whatever was left of it. Our next story is from Canada. Once again, the country is making headlines for slinging mud at India. Yesterday, Canada's spy service chief made a baseless allegation. Her name is Vanessa Lloyd. She is the interim head of the Canadian Security Intelligence Service. She said, and I'm quoting, "We have seen that the government of India has the intent and the capability to interfere in Canadian communities and democratic processes to assert its geopolitical influence. Canadian and Canada-based proxies, as well as contacts in their networks, are increasingly relied on to conduct Government of India foreign interference activities. In simpler words, Canada's spy chief says that India could meddle in their upcoming election. Canada is going to polls on the 28th of April. The snap election was called on Sunday by the country's new Prime Minister, Mark Carney. Carney is from Canada's Liberal Party, the party formerly led by Justin Trudeau. And Trudeau is the reason that India-Canada ties are at their lowest point. In 2023, Trudeau accused India of assassinating a person on Canadian soil, a Khalistani terrorist called Hardeep Singh Nijjar. Without any proof, Trudeau blamed India for the killing. Obviously, that sparked off a diplomatic row, and Indo-Canadian relations hit rock bottom. Canada is yet to provide evidence to back up its charge against India. But with Trudeau out, New Delhi might have thought that this was all in the past. Trudeau, of course, was shown the door earlier this month for dragging his party to new depths of unpopularity. So the Liberal Party brought in Carney instead. He is their new face. The 60-year-old former central banker is hoping to revive the party's fortunes. And he's been trying to distance himself from the mess that Trudeau left behind, even going so far as to reverse their stance on India. Carney said that he intends, and I'm quoting, he intends to rebuild ties with India. So New Delhi decided to wait and watch, only to see this, more baseless allegations. Now, to be fair, it's not Carney saying all of this. It is Canada's spy chief, Vanessa Lloyd. She's a remnant of the Trudeau era, and she's still spouting the talking points from back then. She made a speech yesterday and attempted to lump India together with Canada's adversaries, countries like China and Russia. Lloyd said that China, and I'm quoting, China is highly likely to use AI-enabled tools to attempt to interfere with Canada's democratic process in this current election. She also had this to say about Russia. Russia has worked to create dissemination networks across social media and news websites that promote Kremlin talking points. It is possible that Russia will use these online networks to carry out foreign information manipulation and interference operations targeting Canadians. There was one more potential meddler in Lloyd's list, and that was Pakistan. She said that Islamabad could interfere in the Canadian elections to counter India's growing global influence. The rest of Lloyd's list makes sense. Western nations have always been wary about China and Russia, often with good reason. And as for Pakistan, it is not surprising that they would want to undermine India in whatever way possible. But then to add India to this rogue gallery, that is ridiculous. It is right out of the Trudeau playbook, a desperate ploy to cobble together some Khalistani votes. Again, Lloyd is a Trudeau-era official. This was their default setting for years, but now Carney is in charge. If he's serious about rebuilding ties with India, he needs to put a stop to this baseless slander. If not, there's no chance that India-Canada ties will improve. China has a new weapon, and it's not about power projection. It is about cutting power cables. You heard that right. China has unveiled a deep-sea cable cutting device. It's the first nation in the world to do so, to officially disclose such a tool. This cable cutter can operate at depths of 4,000 meters. But most undersea cables are just 2,000 meters below the surface. So what is China's plan here? What are they trying to do? Why have they developed cable cutters to operate 4,000 meters below the sea level? China has already been accused of sabotaging underwater cables, and the latest unveiling shows that it is the biggest threat to undersea networks across the world. Our next report dives deep.
Deep beneath the ocean, hidden from view, lies a global network. Thousands of cables connect continents, nations, and people. The deep-sea cable network is responsible for providing power and internet to millions of people. Whether you're a gamer in South Korea, a banker in Switzerland, or an influencer in Brazil, chances are that your internet is supplied through these undersea cables, because over 95% of global internet traffic is transmitted through underwater cables. Undersea cables are not a new phenomenon. They have been used for communications for more than 150 years. And nations have been mindful of safeguarding this vital undersea network. That is, until China decided to take matters into its hands. Beijing has just unveiled a deep-sea cable-cutting device which can cut the underwater communication, power and internet lines. China is now the first country in the world to publicly accept that it has deep-sea cable-cutting devices. Developed by the China Ship Scientific Research Center, the device can target armored cables that are layered with steel. It can operate at depths of 4,000 meters, despite most undersea cables being at just 2,000 meters. A titanium alloy shell and oil-compensated seals prevent the cable cutter from exploding at such depths. It can be mounted on cheap submersibles and is operated remotely using a robotic arm. China operates the world's largest submersible fleet, which means this cable cutter could be seen on thousands of Chinese submarines. China's latest cable cutter poses a threat to global maritime power dynamics. Beijing has already been accused of underwater sabotage. Taiwan says that Chinese ships have cut undersea cables at least 27 times in the last 5 years. These include cables going from Taiwan to its islands near China, particularly Dongyin and Matsu. Last month, Taiwan even seized a Chinese ship after accusing it of cutting undersea cables, though China denies any wrongdoing. But the accusations against China go beyond its region. At least 2 underwater cables were damaged in the Baltic Sea in November last year. A cable between Germany and Finland was ruptured, while an internet cable between Sweden and Lithuania was also severed. And in both occasions, Chinese vessels were seen repeatedly passing over the cables. China denies any involvement in the incidents, but Europe feels otherwise. And no one is going to buy China's arguments any longer. As it boasts about a new undersea cable cutter, all fingers are now pointing at Beijing.
From China's dubious plans in the sea, we turn to a more responsible naval power, India. The Indian Navy is expanding its partnerships. They will hold drills next month. We're talking about large-scale exercises, and for the first time, only with African nations. They're calling it the Africa-India Key Maritime Initiative, or AKAM for short. In Sanskrit, AKAM means unity. It is part of India's military outreach in the Indian Ocean region. India is already considered the first responder, also the preferred security partner for East Africa. The drills next month will only deepen that understanding. This is the inaugural edition of this exercise. It will take place off the coast of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. India's Defence Minister Rajnath Singh will inaugurate it. At least 11 countries are participating this time, including India, co-hosts Tanzania, Comoros, Djibouti, Eritrea, Kenya, Madagascar, Mauritius, Mozambique, Seychelles, and South Africa. Like I said, this is the maiden edition of AKAM. The exercise will be held every 2 years, and more African partners will be invited in the years ahead.
This again is a first of its kind exercise for the Indian Navy and for India. It will be co-hosted by the Indian Navy and the Tanzania People Defence Force, and will also witness participation from 10 African countries from the east coast of Africa. As on date, we are likely to have 7 ships from our African partners and friends, with observers also joining in. So, AKAM is a Sanskrit word, means unity, and it aims to bring regional countries together towards a common goal of maritime security and growth in the region, because in the end, we are all united through the oceans.
The Indian Navy's goal is clear: increasing interoperability with African allies and deepening security cooperation in the region. India is already working closely with many African partners. Like Mauritius, India has access to their bases and close ties with Mauritius. Prime Minister Modi, in fact, was in Port Louis earlier this month. That's the capital of Mauritius. It was a 2-day visit focused on boosting bilateral ties. Then we have Madagascar. India has a listening post there. It monitors all maritime traffic in the region. Nations like the US, France and Germany and many others have bases in the Horn of Africa and Djibouti, mostly for anti-piracy operations. But India is the only country that has bases along the East African coast. And here's why this is important. New Delhi is committed to tackling regional threats. Threats such as piracy, illegal trafficking, unregulated fishing, and unreported research missions. And China is behind at least 2 of these threats. Their fishing boats and their spy ships often visit the Indian Ocean. The Chinese call them research vessels, but their purpose is clear to the world. They spy for Beijing, and they frequently operate off the East African coast. Several countries in this region have raised concerns. For instance, last year, Mozambique protested against Chinese trawlers. Their navy tracked more than 130 Chinese fishing boats off their coast. 130. What were they doing there? Being fishy, as usual. The Chinese have been overfishing in their waters for decades. Now their trawlers operate beyond China's maritime borders. And here's what Beijing does. It sends a mob of fishing boats near foreign waters. These boats fish unchecked, and they deplete local fish populations. All because China cannot stop over-consuming. It is basically stealing the resources of other countries. And in recent years, Africa has been at the receiving end of this. Chinese trawlers have been reported near many countries in Africa, in Kenya, Somalia, Mozambique, Ghana, Senegal, and Nigeria. And what are these countries doing about the illegal Chinese presence? A lot of them are turning to India. They see New Delhi as an ally and a democratic maritime power, a power that won't engage in suspicious ocean activity. Nor will India send fishing militias to deplete Africa's resources. The ACOM exercise is just the first step. Africa is sending a message to China. The tide now belongs to India. For our last story today, let's talk about the pyramids. They're massive, they're mysterious, they've been standing tall for 4,500 years, and according to a new group of scientists, they might be hiding something incredible beneath them. Picture a secret underground city, lost artifacts untouched for centuries, hidden knowledge that could rewrite history. Ancient secrets waiting to be uncovered. Basically, it sounds like the plot of every Indiana Jones movie. But before you start packing your bags, there's a catch. This discovery was made by a team of researchers in Italy. They claim their radar scans prove that there's a vast hidden complex below the pyramids. But not everyone believes them. Why is that? Our next report digs into it.
Picture this. You're standing in front of the pyramid of Khafre. The sun blazing overhead, the sand crunching under your feet. Somewhere beneath you, there's a hidden city, a whole underground world waiting to be uncovered. It's the kind of revelation that could rewrite history, or at the very least, fuel a dozen conspiracy theory YouTube channels. It started with a research team from Italy, Professor Corrado Malanga and his team from the University of Pisa. They're convinced they've found something big. Using radar pulses, they claim to have detected a vast underground complex, spiral staircases, mysterious chambers, and even a network of tunnels leading deeper into the earth. His team believes there are 8 distinct vertical cylinder-shaped artifacts that span more than 2,100 feet beneath the pyramids. And get this, they believe it might even contain the legendary Hall of Records, an ancient library rumored to hold the lost knowledge of Egyptian civilization. Basically, it's the holy grail of archaeology. But before you start planning your own Indiana Jones adventure, there's a tiny problem. Most experts think it's complete nonsense. They see only exaggerated claims and a severe misunderstanding of radar technology. Most insist that this has been tried before using traditional methods like gravimetry and muon tomography. Those yielded nothing. It never showed anything close to an underground city. Let's play devil's advocate for a second. What if the Italian team are actually onto something? What if there really is a hidden city under Khafre's pyramid? What if the Hall of Records exists and is packed with secrets? Secrets that could change everything we know about ancient Egypt. History is full of examples of big discoveries being ignored, downplayed, or outright suppressed. Of course, this is the kind of thinking that keeps late-night radio shows in business, but admit it, a part of you wants it to be true. For now, Malanga's research hasn't been peer-reviewed, and until other scientists can confirm his findings, skepticism is the name of the game. Plus, the tech he used is cool but not infallible, and honestly, getting down there to check is easier said than done. Yet, there's something undeniably exciting about the idea. The pyramids have been around for 4,500 years. Who's to say they don't still have a few secrets? Until someone cracks open the earth beneath Khafre's pyramid, all we have are questions and a whole lot of speculation. Because if there's one thing ancient Egypt teaches us, it's that secrets are buried deep. Could the Hall of Records be one of those mythic treasures, or just another legend lost to time? We don't know yet, but that's the fun of it. Because whether it's ancient mysteries or modern conspiracies, sometimes the unknown is just as exciting as the truth.
No prizes for guessing what the joke is today. It's the comic gold from the White House. President Donald Trump wanted to send a clear signal to the Houthis, but looks like his officials heard him wrong. They huddled on the messaging app Signal instead. We just told you what happened next. They basically shared all their war plans with a random journalist. Americans are not feeling too secure after this fiasco, but some are seeing the funny side of things. Take a look. Now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. Israeli lawmakers hold up the number of hostages remaining in Gaza during a budget vote. Protesters clash with the police over Indonesia's military law, and a dazzling spiral swirls in the sky following the SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket launch. Finally, taking you back in history, on this day in 1975, King Faisal of Saudi Arabia was assassinated. He was shot dead by his nephew during a public audience in Riyadh. King Faisal had been an influential leader in the kingdom, known for his oil diplomacy and efforts to modernize Saudi Arabia. We're leaving you on that note. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
משרד החקלאות, אנחנו מצביעים. כנסת כולם, שהנפת שלט במליאה כרגע עובר עבירה אתית, שתדעו את זה, אבל...
Greeting you with aloha and namaste.
I love India.
Presence, occupation of a territory by another country pertains to India, what we saw in Kashmir.
How do you see Trump's America?
Yes, the current administration behaves differently from the previous administration.
Are you saying that there are foreign powers who are trying to bring down the current government in Syria?
Exactly.
Bluntly, Iran, maybe Russia too.
Prime Minister Modi committed to South-South, cooperation.
Not over 50%.
Is Ukraine prepared to pay the price for that peace?
No compromises at the cost of territorial integrity and sovereignty.